Well, as you can see out there, it's another big snowy day. It's cold. And you know what? I want to bring this conversation indoors. I had a series of life goals. We all have goals in life that we want to aspire to do bigger and better things. And I did that. I was in that position. I had all kinds of goals and aspirations coming from electrical engineering perspective, background. The electrical industry as a whole was a very fascinating space for me. And the organization I belonged to was also very opportunistic in the way that it was corporate. So I had many opportunities to potentially move up the proverbial ladder. And I did. I always wanted to do things better. You know, as a matter of fact, I was a lead on a subcommittee that created some new technology within the organization that made life a lot simpler. Yes, it made life safer, easier for the field personnel, and as well, it was just there to enhance the safety margin, improve the safety capacity. Now, I've had a lot of goals to move up in organizations, do bigger and better things. And I've always been that person. I've never been okay with status quo. I've always been fine with trying to pursue the next level. And not from a leadership perspective, just to, say, hey, I'm the next best thing from sliced bread. No, it's always from looking at things from a higher perspective, another perspective. Trying to get a better look on something. Maybe I can make a better improvement on something. Possibly I always wanted to have impact. And if there's one word in my mind, in my life, it's impact. What sort of impact have I had in my life? I've worked through careers. I've had many career options and choices throughout the years. And I've always felt myself trying to move up, trying to expose myself to a higher perspective, trying to make things better for myself, for others, and just generally trying to learn every step of the way. But there was a series of 3 major events that came to blows. And I'm a believer in when you get 3 triggers, it sort of is telling you something. See, like they say, 3 strikes, you're out. Well, I sort of believe that. I sort of live that to a degree. And I had 3 major life events that virtually shut down my effort to try to achieve these big goals, these lofty goals that I've always had in my life. Now, I always have goals, and I've certainly never given up. But there's goals of pursuit in, career aspirations, as it were, in the corporate game, that went away. I have other goals, sure, personal goals. I want to be healthy. I want to spend more time with the family. I certainly want to get into some other hobbies. And we're talking about that in retirement. But a lot of these goals that I've had in my general career have waved bye-bye because of 3 major events. I want to break this down because every time you see something happens that sort of shakes you up, it rattles you, it sort of reaches down to the core and just gives you a good tug. And it puts you in a state of mind where you really second guess, or you really start to think twice about what matters most in life. And you see, I've had some of those moments, in recent years. First moment in the trifecta, if you will. The first moment was a moment, when I was still working in the industry. We were doing a phase rotation check on a transformer. It was a 25 kV transformer to 600/347 delta Y. And with that transformer, it also had a fairly low impedance, internal impedance. So in other words, the arc flash potential was very, very high. Now we went in there and we basically had, to cut to the chase, we ended up having a mechanical or an equipment breakdown. Now, normally you can do these phase rotation checks live. We went in there. We started to do our checks with the energized transformer on the low side, of course, the 600/347 volt side. And we had a catastrophic equipment failure. Well, I happened to be holding the equipment. Fortunately for me, I was wearing gloves and protection in some regards. My partner was also wearing gloves, although they weren't properly rated gloves. He ended up sustaining serious burns. So what we ended up seeing was a catastrophic electrical arc flash incident. This resulted in my partner with severe burns all over the face, hands. Some of his clothes were burned off around his wrists. His hair was burnt back, goatee was gone, and his glasses he was wearing actually had chunks of copper in it. It was a catastrophic event, to say the least. It was absolutely guttering, guttering for me. It really put me on my heels, in a mindset perspective. It really made me second guess. Up to that point, you always feel invincible. When you're working in the high voltage industry, you learn the safety protocols, you follow the rules, the steps, you know the equipment, you know the limitations. But until something really happens, it never really hits home. Well, there was a day where it hit home for me. And so the individual I was working with sustained serious injuries. I had injuries, tinnitus. I was shaken up pretty good. The door that blew open hit me, and I had basically some bruising, but relatively scot-free. I was lucky to walk away with a little tinnitus. Down comes the alley. Down the alley, all of a sudden, it seemed like 5 minutes later, all of a sudden an ambulance shows up. We had a trucker that was going to do a transformer removal for us. He called the ambulance, 911. Next thing you know, we had an ambulance show up, check us out, drag us off to the hospital, to which point we were both checked over. It was a very devastating night, absolutely devastating for everybody. Our safety watch was shaken and rattled. I was shaken, physically somewhat injured, and my partner was very injured. Well, guess what? The next 2 to 3 years looked like skin grafting for my partner. They had to take skin from one body part, cut it off, re-sew it, and they have to keep going through this process as the skin heals and starts to adapt to the new skin. His hands needed skin grafting. He had a little bit of work on his nose, a little bit of his face. Eventually his hair grew back and he became okay. Now it became a bar conversation. Later on, it was some chats, maybe even a couple giggles along the way, but boy, did we learn some lessons from that. And so that's one of those moments in your life where you really give your head a shake and realize, wow, life is short. Life is short. Okay, moving on. A few years later, I'm at my hockey, watching my son play some hockey. I'm at the rink, and one of these older dads, he's actually a grandfather of one of the kids that my son plays with. And I, chummed up with him. We had been sort of buddies at the rink for some time. We chat, small talk, the usual dad talk, at the rinks. And him and I got to be pretty good chummy there at the rink. And, we chit chat and talk about hockey. And, we'd even talk about, the future. And he mentioned that, he is Portuguese. He was talking about possibly moving back to Portugal when the kids get older. My wife's Portuguese too, so it was a pretty good conversation. We find that sort of that connection point. So we had always sort of grown fond of each other and having these chats, at least at the rink anyhow. He was an older gentleman. He probably had 15 maybe probably closer to 20 years on me. And, it was always a fun chit chat. Then one day he comes in and he came out. He was late to the rink. I was watching my son and his kid was on the ice, or his grandkid was on the ice. And next thing you know, lo and behold, I'm looking at him. He's talking to me. And all of a sudden, something weird starts happening. His face was starting to droop and he's starting to talk like, I look at him for a second and he's slurring and his face is kind of dragging a little bit. And then he looks puzzled and he keeps feeling his face like he's kind of like feeling it. But he looked a little bit worried and a little distressed, but he's feeling his face almost like it was numb and he's trying to feel it and he's kind of massaging his face a little bit. And I got a little worried. Well, guess what? He was having a stroke. That in itself too was a massive, massive change. When I realized at that moment, he is going through a medical event. To have this in front of your face where you see somebody going through distress, that is an absolute mind screw, to say the least. So that was the second event, okay, where we experienced this. Fortunately, he survived, and it never ended up being a catastrophic issue. Some people come back from strokes, others don't. Now, another event, and we've spoken about this briefly, the C word back in 2020, we all know what happened there. That in itself wasn't that catastrophic. I mean, we all move on. It was, if anything, it was kind of an interesting time because it really tested our wares. It really showed us who the people in our world really matter. It really showed us and, displayed the types of governments and leaders that we have in our place. It really challenged us as a society. But that in itself, believe it or not, wasn't the event for me. Because we sort of wade through it, we navigated. The The big third event for me that really triggered me and made me totally change and shift my attitude about these big career objectives and goals and make me realize how little they really matter and how much other things in my life really matter a lot more was in 2021. Now, it was a downgoing, digressing state. My father, we all know, I've expressed this, in other videos, how he was suffering from dementia for probably 7 to 9 years, leading up to this and progressively getting worse. My mother was dealing with a lot of health issues, cancer and so on. I was out on my own. Of course, I've got a wife and 4 kids. So we were busy, but we spent as much time, we'd visit as much as we could. And my parents were struggling. My mother had to put my father into an old folks home to get the physical assistance to him because he had a bad gait. He no longer take care of himself. And he was getting quite bad. The deterioration was ramping up. And so he ended up the last few years, I think it was the last 6 to 7 years in assisted living home. But there was a day, and it was in March, and it was in 2024. And that was such a devastating day. And sadly, we all know those days are coming. Those days are always going to come for everybody. Every one of us is going to experience that day at some point. But that day really hit me hard. When I got that call from my mother and she was sobbing and she said, "Your father just passed away." That was devastating. Absolutely devastating. As ready as you think you can be, as much as you acknowledge and see the deterioration and know that there are days that are numbered, as much that you recognize that we all will have that day, as much as you try to come to terms with all of this, it just doesn't make it any easier. It's not an easy pill to swallow. And that day was number 3 for me. And when I finally saw one of the strongest men in my life, my father, call it quits that day in March of 21, I knew right there my priorities are going to change a little bit here. Now, my wife, my kids have always been my biggest priority, in my personal life, other than parents, but from the career perspective, we all get over hyper focused on trying to escalate our careers, trying to move up the ladder, trying to do bigger things, trying to make ourselves, get that next title, trying to get that big pay raise. And all those things feel like big priorities to us. But that day, after that third big event for me, made me realize that none of that other crap even mattered. Sure, I had to work. Sure, we have to make $1. Sure, we have to pay the bills and, keep the roof over our head. I mean, we have to live in our homes like this. We have to pay the bills. That's the bottom line. So the world doesn't stop because of these events. But what it does do is it make us refocus. My attitude and perspective on climbing this corporate ladder vaporized. It didn't mean I stopped working. On the contrary, I work hard. And sometimes I work even harder and immerse myself in my work even more so, almost as a way to sort of take myself out of a reality that is unfortunately inevitable, and it's there and you can't run from it. But it takes you out for maybe that 4, 5, 6 hours, maybe 8 hours, where you can sort of block yourself out from realities like that. But then you get home or you're on your way home, or you have another chat with your mother or somebody else, and it brings that reality closer again. And there's no getting away from it. We all have to mourn. We all have to experience loss. That's just what life is. There's a series of wins and a series of losses, and that's what life is. It's really how we come back from that dictates, our personality and dictates our, who we really are. Because we are a sum of our, or a product of our environment. And so those 3 big events brought me to a place where I no longer really cared about making anything different change in my career. Some of you probably ask, well, that's probably where it all started with your downhill slide in the corporate game. No, that wasn't. It was almost slightly before that, and it wasn't immediately after either. It realistically was I don't know. It felt like it was probably about a year after that I started to see some changes and all of that. Suffice it to say, regardless, it's irrelevant. The point is, yes, I've decided to do other things, continue on with the YouTube channel. When this stuff happened, what it did was it said, okay, look, this no longer matters. This job climbing thing doesn't really matter. What matters? Things that matter closer to you, your health, your wife, your kids, your husband, spouse, whatever. Those things matter most. But what also mattered to me was I ended up kicking my YouTube game into high gear. I doubled down. I worked harder. I held my account manager to a higher standard. I pushed harder. I generated more content. I wanted to be the best that I could be. You see, because no longer did I see the relevance in making somebody else rich and have someone else benefit. I now saw the benefit more so, my shift in perspective of doing better things that are immediately going to support me, my health, and my wife and kids, and of course my parents. In this case, my mother was left and my brother. My primary focus now became on bettering our own personal life in a way that we can directly control. See, because working the corporate game, you're not improving your life. I mean, sure, you're earning a living, and you might be earning a defined benefit pension, which does indirectly long-term help out. These are all wins in some way. But they're not direct feedback. And the direct feedback comes in, the effort I put in here will initiate a response over here directly. In corporate game, you put in more effort, you just put in longer hours. All it does is raise expectations for the boss. And then you just got to work harder, longer, faster, just to raise the bar. But that wasn't no longer my objective. My goals in life changed. I no longer cared about being the best in the corporate game. I just wanted to improve my own personal life in a way that I could directly impact. And so hence, herein lies my emphasis on pushing the channel harder, focusing more on family, focusing more, spending more time to be more in tune with my mother who was still around at that time. Certainly focusing more on my wife and our relationship, the kids. I was coaching or helping coach with my son's hockey from time to time, and just spending time in places that mattered most. And focus on the little things in life a little bit more. Yeah, I still like my toys. We talk about the cars and things like that. That was a little bit of a shift for me too. Because that does sort of click. And sometimes having a nice car in the garage has a connotation with some other events. So it connects up with and resonates with a memory you had. So if you have a car that maybe you bought at a certain time and maybe you took your parents out for a drive, or it connects that dot somehow, and now all of a sudden there's a negative memory result of that car has to go. Or that element, that component has to change in some way. And maybe there's a positive memory that you took from that. Well, you hold on to that in some way. So this is what I started to realize. 3 big impacts on my life. Of course, we're a series of events, and realistically, I've had dozens of big life-changing events. Some good, some bad. Some of my best, of course, was meeting my wife. That was one of the best moments of my life. Of course, having my first child, and then of course every child after that were some of my best moments of my life. Graduating high school, college, all those things are great. But the big life-changing ones was getting married, meeting my wife and the kids. Of course, loss of, my grandparents, one of my favorite uncles passed away. And then it just becomes a series of loss. Unfortunately, as we get older, loss becomes more of the typical. You go through series. Seems like in your 20s and 30s, there seems to be a series and a surge of weddings. Then you hit your 40s and 50s, then there's a surge of loss. And that seems to be where I'm at right now. So what it does all bring to mind is life is short. It's way too short. And I could find myself, I could literally be here today, gone tomorrow. Because they say once you hit 50, the warranty's off. The warranty period's gone. And that's where I'm at right now. At 54, I'm rolling in 55 here in June. And realistically, it's you wake up one day and something drastic can change. And, Lord knows, who knows? I mean, I've had relatives live to 90. I've had relatives pass away in their 30s. So we don't know. I mean, my parents, my father passed away at 83, my mother at 78. She was just about 79. I mean, if you're going by laws of averages, I should be around 80. But we don't know that. And 80, hey, I'm 55 here right away. What does that give me? 25 more years? That's if I follow the law of averages and if I've got some luck on my side. But, I mean, as always, they always say 66.1 is the average where people get brutally sick. I may only have 10 years of where I'm actually enjoying life and I'm out there and creating content for you folks and enjoying my life in a way that's unique, certainly, and definitely one that's a little bit independent. I don't need that corporate game. I don't need that corporate job, and I'm loving my life right now. I feel like I'm in that sweet spot. I'm on the last third of this life, and I hope to make it one of my best and most enriching, fulfilling parts of my life. And life is what you make of it, really. And that's what I've started to realize. But if there's one thing, those big goals and my objectives in the job career ladder climbing, it didn't matter. None of that matters anymore. What matters is just bringing it close to home, focusing on your spouse, your kids, your health, some of your own personal hobbies, which I'll be showcasing some of my hobbies, because I truly believe as I go through this journey, as I was basically sent down the can, and I got the size 10 boot across the backside last February 28th. I want to share with all of you the journey that I've been going through, because a journey isn't just like when you retire, when you quit, when you get fired. That's part of it. But I believe life sort of builds you and builds your perspective on life and how you rebound and how you come back from those big events. And so the journey, that's why I got to keep telling you and showing you, showcasing how my journey got me here and now how I'm adapting and moving on. Because life is short and it may be wonderful today and it may be wonderful tomorrow. And hopefully it's wonderful at 92. But there's no guarantees in this life. And things come on suddenly. Like my friend there with the stroke. Like that big catastrophic event. Like a car crash. I've been in numerous car crashes. T-boned. Wham, you wake up, you're in shock. And next thing you know, you spun around 4 times. Like I had a big event once at work where somebody ran a red light, T-boned us. A friend of mine and I spun around. We were shook up, transported to the hospital, neck in a brace, x-rays, doctors. And of course, it all happened so fast. So take this for what it is. Just know that live life to the fullest. Those goals, your career goals and your objectives in your corporate job or your big career, those are all wonderful. But for me, that all changed after 3 major events that sort of triggered me. There's always lots of events, but those were 3 big ones here that sort of really hit close to home for me in a way that a lot of the other ones didn't. Maybe it's my age, maybe it's the severity, maybe it's the frequency, maybe it's that they all happened bang, bang, boom so quickly together. Whatever it is, I can't explain it, but they had a lasting impact up here. And so that's why I want to say, I'm now focused on the more important things in life, and I really don't care as much about what other people care about. Chasing the golden toque, so to speak, at some of these corporate games just doesn't matter anymore. And, I'd be out here walking with all of you, but look at the wonderful snow out there. It is absolutely devastating. It's about minus 20 right now. It's snowing like crazy, and there's a strong wind chill. So I thought I'd bring it in today, and I can't help but thank each and every one of you for your support. And again, as always, hope you have an absolute magnificent and wonderful weekend. Talk to you all real soon. Bye-bye.